Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Lextran's first Strategic Planning Committee meeting. My name is Fred Combs. I'm here to lead the meeting this afternoon. Mr. Ardingale.
Thank you. We will call the meeting to order. We need to call the roll. This isn't we're not taking any action items. There's no reason for quorum. The Strategic Planning Committee is made up of myself as chair, Vice Chair Jamie Rogers, long-term board member George Ward. Lady Borges Gonzalez is a member of the committee, was unable to attend today. I appreciate the extra time that the staff is taking to join us today, as well as our intrepid representative from TransDev, Jared Varner, and our moderator, Dave Lee. Dave and I have not had a chance to meet, but we're looking forward to working with you. We will, as with all public meetings, have time for public comment. Seeing none, we will move ahead. There are no minutes to approve, so we will jump right into the presentation and discussion. Take it away, Dave.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you received a little blurb on my background so you know sort of who I am and what my background in transit is. I've done strategic planning retreats with other transit boards, and interestingly, I think what is intended here is that you have engaged an on-call consultant who will then actually carry out a lot of the work to be done in the strategic planning. So a lot of what we hope to accomplish today is to get a structure and a framework for what direction you're going to give them. In preparation for this meeting, I've read through your comprehensive operations analysis and the minutes of your last strategic planning exercise, which was almost exactly 5 years ago, and the long-range metropolitan transportation plan for the Lexington area developed by your MPO. And in that plan is at the end it talks about strategies to address transit, because so much of the long-range plan doesn't really talk about transit, which is interesting, and yet it's revealing in the sense that when the people doing the long-range plan talk to the public, when they had public hearings, they had public input, and they then summarized the 5 most frequent recommendations from the public, none of them dealt with transit. It was all about pedestrians and bicycles and the traffic flow on the streets, but not so much about transit. And there is good news and bad news in that. But what's interesting is that at the very end of the long-range plan, they talk about strategies for transit, and this is the quotation. And when Fred and I were talking earlier this morning, he thought maybe this was something that he had written 5 years ago or more, the last time they updated it. But it says, the strategy is to develop a long-range transit plan and vision for the future of high-quality transit service, and then build community consensus and funding strategies to achieve that vision. And that is about as perfectly succinct a description of what the strategic planning process is intended to do. How do you develop a vision of the future for this organization? And then how do you build consensus around that vision among the board members, the staff, other stakeholders, elected officials, all the other participants that would have something to say about this? So, the engagement of your on-call, and I gather that was approved at yesterday's board meeting, so that's good. You have someone now that you can reach out to. There are probably like 5 things that go into what you would want them to do. And the first is simply to do what I did in preparation for this, which is to review all of these other documents that talk about planning in the region. There's the long-range plan developed by your MPO. There's the last comprehensive operations analysis that was done by TransDev. Who did the COA? Nelson Nygaard. And there's your last strategic plan. There's the National Transit Database and the last few years of that show trends in terms of ridership, cost, service levels. So that's their first job, is to review that stuff. The second thing, which is interesting, is to look 5 or more years into the future and say, what changes do you expect to have happen in this area that transit will have to adapt to? Notwithstanding things that you'd like to do to make the status quo better, but what changes do you foresee? Now, this is a challenging exercise because 5 years ago, nobody would have foreseen what we went through during the pandemic and how that's affected transit ridership, commuting, travel patterns, all thrown topsy-turvy by the pandemic. And different places have recovered better than others. And from what I can tell, Lexington has recovered very well. You could be San Francisco, you could be Hartford, Connecticut, which are really struggling to get back anywhere near what they were before the pandemic. So that's good news. There are a couple of things that were interesting in the long-range plan that I picked up on. You will may have other observations. One was that the MPO significantly reduced their estimate of annual population growth from what it had been to something on the order of 1%, which means there are some cities that are grappling with rapid expansion, into sprawl, population growth, influx of immigrant populations, an influx of young people choosing to work there because of what employment opportunities there are.
We shrank.
We all know that. We all know we're not growing.
Well, that's okay.
We don't have anywhere for anybody else.
Except that we took a tour of the area this morning, and there are some areas that are ballooning in terms of at least development in, some of it is residential, a lot of it is retail. And some areas that currently look like big vacant fields are going to have the kind of infill that you've had in other parts of the area. But that's one. Now, the one thing about population growth that, again, they seized upon was that the largest demographic group that appears to be growing significantly are senior citizens, which is a market that transit historically has not done well to attract. And I know it's partly because there is a policy that you would like to promote aging in place, which is common around the country. But the more you do that, then the more it challenges the community to find ways to provide mobility for people, senior citizens, unless we assume that they keep driving their car forever. But that's a demographic that you may want to address as part of a 5-year plan. The other issue, and this again is what you're going to ask the on-call consultant to do. Take another look at all the trends that are taking place in terms of population, and the other one is in terms of the economy. In what ways do you see the economic drivers of the Lexington region changing? The good news is the biggest drivers you have today are very permanent institutions. The university isn't going to go away, the hospitals aren't going to go away, the big logistical companies aren't going to go away. And that seems to be that I would say is good news in the economy, that your major drivers aren't precarious, you're not worried about the factory closing and jobs being taken away. On the other hand, you may or may not see all new industries moving in that create different travel demands for their workers or employment opportunities for the people who live here. But that's the second thing that you'd ask the consultant to do, is do this 5-year trending and help us understand how those things play into what the strategic plan should be for Lextran. The third thing is to update what was done 5 years ago in your last strategic plan, which is called a SWOT analysis. And some of you are probably familiar with this. You do it in private industry all the time. Internally, what are the strengths and weaknesses? Externally, what are the opportunities and threats? Now, this was the report from the last strategic planning, and literally it's 5 years ago this month. And what's interesting is that when we talked this morning about what were the things that were seen as strengths and weaknesses, or strengths and challenges 5 years ago, they're very similar today. You said, where we're excelling, you were very proud of the fact that your transit fare is low and affordable and steady, and there's no big appetite to make your customers pay more for the cost of their trip. You've received grant awards for purchasing vehicles and for upgrading your facilities. And we looked at the transit center, and an upgrading of that facility will help a lot. Paratransit, where we're excelling, that may be a different question today. Service at the university, which generates a huge percentage of all your daily trips, and that's a relationship that seems to be thriving. Partnerships, want to increase moving forward. We've got a great administrative team, people who really care about the system, an engaged board, and I've seen other transit agencies where you have board members that are not engaged or not particularly interested or have a very narrow agenda to bring to the table. Employee morale was pretty good. The budget management was something you thought you were excelling in 5 years ago. And going green, you were having your first investment in zero emission technology. So the challenges you said 5 years ago, one was the age of the fleet, and there seems to be some will, at least in the long-range plan, to do a regular bus replacement. Choice ridership, and that may be the thing that you want to think about most strategically. What do you do to make the service you operate so attractive that people choose to ride transit rather than drive their car? Funding with long-term capital. How do we leverage partnerships with government, education, healthcare, developers, and business? Roads and infrastructure. The issue was that we saw this morning when we took the tour. There are a lot of bus stops that are in funny places that are almost inaccessible to, certainly to anybody with mobility impairment. Hiring and retention. That was a challenge 5 years ago, and the whole industry has struggled to find and retrain well-qualified bus operators and technicians. That's a universal problem in the industry. You've come a very long way looking at your driver roster just in the last 2 years. So that may be less of a challenge, that you may be better able to look to the future and say, we think we can provide the workforce we need to do the things we want to do. Fuel costs, well, that's volatile, but from all intents and from what we're hearing, we're going to drill, baby, drill. And so we're going to have, we don't expect the cost of fuel, and you're very much invested in CNG, that will work. Perceptions of public transit, and that may be one of the toughest nuts to crack in terms of strategic planning, is what is the perception of Lextran in the mind of the riding public, other elected officials, people in general in the community? Are people largely ignorant of what you do? And that is often the case. You have people who say, yeah, I know there's a transit system here, I see the buses. I never use them, I have no idea where they go, I don't know how to use them, I've never looked at the website. So public perception is important. The car culture, which is going to be true in any city, but the very largest ones, where you have automobile ownership by household is very high. Therefore, that's the preferred mode of transportation. So this is the analysis that you will want your consultant to begin to look at, is to revisit the SWOT analysis that was done 5 years ago, and then to really think strategically about what looking to the future are the opportunities and threats. And that then leads us to the really big question that the consultant will hopefully begin to develop a consensus on among you, among other board members, among the staff, and among all the other stakeholders that you want them to consult with about what is the vision for the future. Now, you all were very forthcoming in answering some questions in preparation for this meeting. And I'm not going to say who said what, but interestingly, we said, one question was, what makes you proudest of being a board member at Lextran? And one answer was, I like supporting our outstanding team. Boy, that's music to anyone's ears to hear a board member say that about. I like providing a mobility solution for people who need it. So that recognizes that for, at least for the population of your ridership that have no other means of transportation, you are providing their essential mobility. I like the fact that we're reliable, but I wish we could be exceptional. Now that's an aspirational term, and I love that term because that's really what the essence of the strategic planning process is. Where are we now? Where would we like to be? What's our vision of where we are? So we're pretty reliable, but are we exceptional? We could be. Maybe not yet. In what word do you think Lexan's riders would think of first to describe their customer experience, and then how would you like that to be different? One answer was, well, I think our customers think that we are friendly but inadequate. And what we'd really like is for them to say we are world class. Another one was to say we think the riders would say we do an adequate job, but we'd like them to say we're convenient. Current word, we're useful, we do the bare minimum, but we'd like to be an economic driver for the region. And one said we want to continue to improve our service. In one word, what do you think people in the community at large think of first when we say describe Lexan's reputation as a public service? One said necessary, but underutilized and inaccessible. One said helpful to those who need it. And one said adequate or poor, but we would like to be visionary. What do you think elected officials would say about Lextran service? They understand we're valuable and necessary for the most vulnerable citizens, but we are not positioned to deliver outstanding service. Service needs to be, this is again what someone said the local officials would likely say, service needs to be expanded. They would say it's adequate, meh. They would say, we would like to see more service, but we understand you need more funding to be secured in order to make that happen. If Lexan had new service to spend, what would be your highest priority? And again, this is just a good sampling of thoughtful, educated answers by prominent people who know something about this organization. Number one said, strengthen paratransit. Balance our income and expenditures for the long run. Service expansion. One said maybe we should look at bus rapid transit because we have a perception problem, and it is because we can only do so much with the funding we have. Staff retention, adding full operations of paratransit. So paratransit comes up twice in that answer. And then the last one was, imagine your ideal vision for Lextran in the future. How is that vision different from today's reality? That's the essence of what the strategic plan has to do first in order to decide what you're going to build consensus around. One answer was high-frequency service with a system design that allows more riders to use the system without having to plan their day around our schedule. What's different is the hub and spoke system creating a long trip if you need to connect with other lines. So basically they're saying more convenience is the ideal vision in the future. Add full operations of paratransit. And then this was one answer. a seamless, sustainable, and inclusive transit system that integrates with other modes, connects all neighborhoods equitably, and is universally viewed as a model of excellence in public transit. This vision would include zero-emission buses, real-time service updates powered by AI, transit-oriented developments around key stops, and a reputation for being the engine driving Lexington's economic and social vibrancy. Embedded in all of these answers are some of the things that if I was your on-call looking to start building what it is you want consensus for, it would be, the words are all there. And my guess is that there's a lot of consistency just among the 4 subcommittee members. My guess is that the full board would not come up with things that were very different. And my guess is that the staff would not come up with things that were very different. At least to the staff we just had lunch with, so I think we had an excellent conversation, and it supported all of those things. So that's developing the vision. And then the next step in the strategic planning process is to develop. Is that someone knocking at the door?
No, it's my cup.
Oh, I'm sorry. The next step is to say, here are levels of change that might occur. There's one level that is the most extreme, that the most visionary, that is the most ambitious, that does the most to achieve all of the things that have been strategized. Second might be something a little less, and the third one might be even less still. If you said, we've decided that frequency of transit service is so critical to our vision for the future, that there has to be more frequent service, because only then can people really rely on the service for their mobility, and will it then draw choice riders. What are the 3 levels of improvement that you could conceivably make, and then what will each one of them cost? And that becomes part of the strategic planning analysis that puts some dollars with the ideas. The next thing that can be part of this, if you want it to be, is to have the consultant say, and these are ways other transit systems around the industry have financed this kind of change. You have a property tax that is wonderfully non-volatile. It's wonderfully stable. It isn't like some other taxes that really fluctuate. The transit system that was everybody's envy once upon a time was Atlanta. They had a 1% sales tax. It was producing huge amounts of money that they had banked, mainly to build their subway system, but they had money to do all kinds of creative things. And then came the recession of 2008, and they suddenly couldn't pay their bills. That's the sales tax issue, that it's pretty volatile. There are other transit systems that have no dedicated transit funding at all, and go hand in hand to the legislature or the city council or the county council every year to get budget, and they're at the mercy of the general economy and how they stack up against other priorities. So the good news is you've got a stable revenue source. The bad news is, I think the consultant will tell you it's not likely to grow at the same pace, maybe even at the cost of living, much less, or the cost of doing business, which includes a lot of things that aren't in the cost of living. But to the extent your cost to operate the transit system will include things like employee wages and benefits, but also the cost of fuel, the cost of heating and lighting your facilities, anything else, not to mention your insurance and what your liability exposures are. So if that's a limit, then the consultant may or may not be engaged to give you advice about what other options there are. You may or may not want them to open that can. And then the last point is about public engagement and outreach. How much outreach and to whom do you want the consultant to do during the development of the plan? And then to come up with because remember the marching order from the MPO and the long-term plan was not only to come up with a strategy, but consensus and funding strategies to achieve the vision. So how do you get others' input integrated in the strategic plan? And then how do you sell it? And what recommendations are there to develop that consensus that will not only make sure that everybody's on the same page and saying, yeah, we think these are the reasonable and necessary priorities for the future to achieve your vision, but also how to pay for it. That's a very ambitious strategic planning challenge for any consultant, but it's common, it's done all over the country, and it's very much what was done 5 years ago. So, that's my presentation. I know this is a public forum, and I don't know how transparent everyone is in this process.
I want us to be able to talk like the cameras are.
Okay, well then, it would be very interesting to hear from you on the questions of strengths and weaknesses, opportunities, and more important, what are your what's your aspirational vision for the organization?
And real quick, before we go there, our main goal today is we need to write an SOW so that we limit what's in our scope for the strategic planning. Just to know that, like, we're not doing the strategic planning today, we're just limiting our scope for the person that's in the strategic plan.
And to that extent, maybe before we have this other discussion, I've sort of laid out for you what would be the key points in the statement of work. Are there other things that you've thought of having in the scope that I've not talked about?
Well, and I want to, does this fit in, all 6 of those components fit in our budget? Yes?
I think so.
I think
so.
Because there are certain components I would take out if it doesn't fit in our budget, and there are certain ones I would prioritize over others.
What do you think would be the priorities?
Well, I don't want to jump ahead. That's just, like, to understand, you laid out a lot of things.
I know.
As someone who charges a lot for strategic planning, I would not fit in a $350,000 budget, so.
I think that outreach question is really the one that's going to drive the cost more than anything else. And how hard do we push that? You know, if we're going to get into the situation where we say, hey, let's do a survey,
Yeah,
we could burn through that money pretty quickly.
right.
So I think that question of outreach to who, to whom, how much, when, what's the vehicle for that outreach, that's going to be, I think, the biggest driver of the cost.
I agree.
One other factor is, I mean, how much work do you put on the consultant versus staff, right? I mean, it's going to be a partnership. You're not just, it's not a turnkey consulting deal. I mean, I think it's definitely collaborative. And so depending on how you handle the outreach, it could be, you need a consultant there, maybe not the whole team, but then, you know, the staff organizes things. But
Because my other thoughts are, to review documents, nowadays you just load it all into AI, and AI summarizes all the documents for you. So it's like you take that out of the scope and say, like, here, summarize all of the documents. And then the SWOT, like, I would like to go into the plan with us already knowing the challenge. Like, I think we could all sit down here and know what the SWOTs are and put that in the scope and not have them spend a bunch of time refiguring out what our SWOT is, unless we feel like it's greatly going to change.
Well, if you agree that nothing much has changed,
Yeah.
or only a few things have changed, then you've already got it summarized here. By the way, I was going to say one thing that's very special about Lextran is the route coverage you have within the region. And one of the statistics was that 90% of employment sites are within half a mile of a bus route. That's phenomenal. That may also mean that you've got routes that are underutilized.
No, I think our SWOT needs to be updated, because there was ones I was checking off here, like, yep, still an issue, nope, not still an issue. But I think it wouldn't take much for this board to very quickly understand which ones are, and not have to spend a lot of the scope doing that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's something that can be done internally. And I think this with the staff as well.
But like, I would like to them to spend more of their funding of number 5, like, what are the options and how do we finance it? That's what I would, and in the public engagement, I feel like that's more on the purview of the leadership, like Fred's job is to go out and get consensus in the community, not the consultant's job. But those are just my
And
opinions.
it's something y'all have done well in the past.
Yes.
We have well-practiced team members for that. Where I can see the consultant being helpful is in thinking about if there are ways or methods of engagement that have proven more effective or less effective. Because I know that we tend to do the same kinds of things. And there's a playbook with anything. I mean, we do this all day long. But I would be interested just to see if there's things that maybe we haven't thought about that can get better numbers, or not necessarily better numbers, but better, more valuable feedback, not just more feedback.
I think we need different perspectives, because we know where to go to get the perspective that we already sort of have.
Yeah, it's the same thing problem that our firm has with libraries. It's easy to get people who are already in the library to tell us what they think about the library. It's the people who aren't coming
Yes.
that you have to, the people who aren't writing, which, you know, in the sum total of our population, a lot more people don't ride than ride. And I think if our goal is better service, which turns into more ridership, then I think talking to non-riders is really important.
Well, and remind me, we also, because I think we've all, well, acknowledged we have our perception issue, and we wanted to shift our perception issue, so we also have money in the budget separately for marketing and outside of this public engagement, and like reshifting our perception. So I don't know how much of that is in that scope versus this scope. And we don't have to say that today, but just, I know that, just so the board knows, there was a separate budget for that. It was much smaller, but. What does our tenured board member think?
I think at least what's going through my head, the more challenging thing is to get consensus on what the aspirational vision for Lextran is. And then steps on how to get to it. Because I think if you polled everybody with these same questions that you asked us about adequate, not necessarily convenient, you know, and, you know, what can we do to make those improvements? And obviously paratransit came up a lot too, so. But I'm in full agreement that you can do the SWOT analysis, we can do that. We can almost do that on our own and send it to you, and it wouldn't even be a public meeting.
Is there, Dave, I guess this is a question for you. Is there ever a scenario in which items 1 through 4 of this list are completed, then engagement is done, and that helps inform the levels of change discussion? I'm thinking of, perhaps cynically, the worst case scenario of we all have aspirational visions for Lextran. I think it's part of why we're here. If the public doesn't share those aspirational visions, then step 5 may look very different. It may be more curtailed. It may even, I mean, we've talked about it. If the public looks at our finance versus our operations and says, we think the funding is fine as it is, that means that we go backwards in terms of our level of service. And while I don't foresee the public accepting that, it's a possibility that we have to plan for. That going forward, we are a smaller system.
Public perception is nobody rides the bus.
Yeah, so I said
I see
yesterday,
empty
the
buses.
only feedback I ever get is empty buses.
Yeah.
And as much as you try to explain to people that the buses aren't, they're not always empty. It is, you're right, it's a big chunk of public perception.
And yet, even the answers that you gave, and certainly what we saw from the past, was a sense in the public that transit provides an essential service that at a minimum provides mobility for people who have no other means of transportation, especially essential workers going to do essential jobs, which is why transit's shining star was during the pandemic. When you said, well, ridership is way down and we're not collecting fares, but boy, everybody on the bus is somebody essential going to a job that they need transportation for. And thank goodness all the orderlies at the hospital and all the back office workers at the grocery stores are able, all the public works employees are all getting to work thanks to us.
If you ask businesses that rely on Lextran, what their opinion is, you're gonna get things probably a lot more glowing. Because, I mean, it showed up when we were trying to change the Newtown Bike Route, right?
Mhm.
And, I mean, they called us and said, you know, we gotta have people at certain times. So, and those are the things that I hear, those are things that I heard long before I was on the board. I was in the hotel business for a lot of years, and, you know, when you get out toward the interstate, that's the only way people from downtown or wherever you're recruiting them from can get there. And it's the same with the shopping malls and all that.
This may be a false memory, but I feel like when we've talked about this in the past, that we've also seen that a large percentage of our growth is in non-commute trips. Is that specific to us, or was that maybe a more global statistic that we were discussing?
I think it's a little bit of both. And some of the larger cities, I think the shift to remote work has affected those. I don't think that has affected us as much. But our focus on campus and moving students, I think, has outpaced our ability to pick up people for employment trips. So I think that has outweighed growth in other areas.
Say that one more time.
I think the growth on campus and the growth in students using the service, that increase in ridership has outpaced any increase in service that would be given to somebody in community.
Okay. That's not to say that we're putting so many more resources towards UK that it's starving resources elsewhere. It's just that we've seen outsized growth in that demographic and in those routes.
Third of your daily ridership.
That's the convenience. That's the choice ridership.
Mhm.
And I've kind of racked my brain on this for a long time, but where is it convenient to ride the bus?
Mm-hmm.
It's convenient to ride the bus to UK because it's hard to park, and the time it takes you to park versus, you know, I know I'm gonna get there roughly, you know, in this period of time, and then I just walk straight to the building I need to be in. But you have to be on a line that you don't have to go downtown to transfer. Because then it's not so convenient.
But a third of all the riders are just parking in outside parking lots and coming into UK. They're not taking it from their home, right?
I think a lot of the students
The
are,
students
like, we
are
service a
their
lot of the
apartments.
apartment complexes that sort of run out the spokes, and they're using it to come into campus.
And then a lot of
There's
people
also
that live
circulating
out
around.
Nicholasville Road that comes straight in.
We have Nicholas
Or
Road
Tate's
and Tate's
Creek.
Creek. And
Okay.
and then we have the student housing around Red Mile.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
not a hub and spoke route, it's a circular, but pick up a lot of ridership there.
The other thing, go ahead. For the economic trends, I know the city just did all of the growth, that big study that laid out our expansion areas, and it predicts all of our growth, I think, for the next however many years, where we added the 4,000 acres into the urban service boundary. I would just take all that economic modeling for our economic growth and
We spoke about that a little this morning.
We did. I think you're right, that you can summarize the first 4 parts of this scope and hand it to the consultant and say, this is the given that you will work with. These are the observations that we've drawn from various documents that have already been presented. You're welcome. We think if you're responsible, you'll read them, but we're not going to ask you to summarize them because we've already picked out what looked like the most relevant statistics and things that they had in there. We can give you our sense of what is going to change in the next 5 years, which isn't that much, but there are some big development projects underway. There is the growing senior population. There are some new employer sites that are being developed. Those are things we're going to have to adjust to anyway. If we accept that not much has changed in the SWOT analysis from what was done 5 years ago, there's no need to ask them to redo it. You can feed that to them.
Yeah, we can look at it and say what's what.
And now you're at the point of really trying to vision, and to do that, that's where you decide what outreach you want to make. And then what it does is to say we're going to have some degree of outreach. We're going to certainly meet intensively with board members, with the staff, with whoever other key people in the community are at the MPO, at City Hall. And then we're going to crystallize all of that synthesize it into a vision. We can come up with different levels of what that would entail. We can tell you what each one of those would cost. And then you decide if you want them also to talk about how to pay for it. I mean, really.
See, I think that's the most important thing. That's why I'm cutting out all through 1 to 3,
Yeah, well,
because I want
that's
them
fine.
to tell me how to pay for it. I don't want the vision.
Well, and
'cause I-
that's where you want them to say, this is what other cities are doing.
Yeah.
These are creative ways that others have grappled with this question. How do we get a bigger budget to do
Yep.
things we want to do?
Even that, though, needs to have some guardrails put on it, because I think the way things work in Kentucky, for instance, local option sales tax, not allowed in the state of Kentucky. It's how most major municipalities pay for major projects, is with local option sales tax, and that is not a lever that we can pull.
But you just write in the SOW, like, consultant must be familiar with Kentucky and state law, and must
Yeah.
fit within
Yeah.
those boundaries.
I'm just saying it limits the
Yeah.
the available analogs
Yeah,
in other
unless
cities.
as a board, we want to champion legislation change.
I would love to, but I don't know.
How aspirational.
I
is
feel
it?
like I can't be the first person to have thought about that.
You know,
You still have to figure out how you're gonna get more people to ride the bus,
But I think, just to,
right?
I think, well, we talked about kind of cutting to the, deciding what do you give the consultant, what do you take away to make sure we're managing costs. But I think part of it is you gotta decide whose plan is it, right? Is it the board and staff, or we're gonna create a plan and then, consultant go tell me what it costs and sell it? Or do you get the community to help you develop the plan and what that looks like? Because if, I don't live in this community, but I know a lot. If you want stakeholders and leaders within the community, different associations, if you want them to buy in, if you get their thumbprints on it throughout the planning process, that can help at the end of the day when you're looking for additional funding or trying to roll out service, or maybe you're reducing service in one area and add it to others. So you've got to make sure the folks who are maybe responsible for that jurisdiction are in the know. So part of the public involvement is not just, asking riders and non-riders, it's getting key stakeholders, a Blue Ribbon Commission engaged to inform what the plan actually looks like, to get some buy-in.
Dave, read that succinct statement that you thought was so great, that you read earlier.
Develop a long-range transit plan and vision for the future of high-quality transit service. Build community consensus and funding strategies to achieve that vision.
So when you read that the first time, I thought, that's kind of backwards. Shouldn't the community be part of the visioning? Instead of, all right, this is what we're gonna do.
Yes,
Here you go.
because you'll never get community consensus unless you're reflecting what the community wants.
Yeah.
But it'll be easy to ask the community, what would you like? And it'd be a lot harder to get consensus on, now we want to implement that, and what are you willing to pay for? And so they are sequential, I think, that in that respect. You want to start by trying to get a vision. And then it's, how do we generate consensus? And I don't know how much of that is a consultant's duty or not. They can certainly talk about effective ways that others have used to develop consensus within the community, but you know your community better than the consultant will. You know who to talk to and who to try to get on board, and whose support will be important, or whose opposition will be important.
Are they Kersey and Kersey's local or not local?
They are local.
And-
That Louisville.
Are there subcontractors that do stakeholder engagement local?
We have one local marketing firm.
Uh-huh.
The consulting firm, the planning firm itself was Nelson Nygaard that did our COA, so they would not be local, but they do have some knowledge of
It just-
working here in the city.
The same, everyone uses the same stakeholder engagement consulting subcontractors here in Lexington, and so that would have been the same person I would have expected would have been really good at this, that component. But it sounds like neither of them have that subcontractor.
So I have conflicting
I don't-
internal thoughts on the order of operations here. One is that I feel like when I've done public engagement in Lexington before, people they're open to hearing new ideas, but their follow-up question is always, well, what's it gonna cost? And so going to the public and saying, what do you want, is also a little bit of like the faster horse problem of, given that we have a lot of people who don't ride the system, they say, well, we want it to be better. They don't necessarily know how it should be better. And if we told them, do you want the buses to come more often or cover more ground, they're likely to say both. And that's not really we certainly can't provide both of those things, or it's very expensive to do so. And so, in my mind, there needs to be some level of honing at the staff and board level and with a consultant to understand, okay, what are the buckets of potential change, and what are the range of costs that might be associated with those, that then get taken out to the public and discussed almost in more of an education first approach. Because I still think that we have a lot of people in Lexington who simply have fundamental misunderstandings about how the agency is run, how the system functions, and without doing a little bit of education, we're not going to get useful feedback about how things can be better.
So it keeps popping in my mind, you do a Super Bowl commercial. I ride the bus.
I can't tell if you're joking or not, George. You have that grin. That makes it very hard for me to understand.
Well, I think
I added the Super Bowl part, but what was going through my mind as things were being discussed was we have to, you have to educate somehow. How do you reach people? I guess we have to do a bunch of YouTube, TikTok stuff.
What's your relationship with the local news media? Do they cover transit, except when there's like an
print a
accident?
newspaper anymore.
What? They don't read a newspaper anymore?
I said they don't print a paper anymore.
Yeah, that's.
They do, they mail it to me. And it's got the news from, I'll get one today from last Friday. So you have to.
TikTok's still in business, you can try.
I don't get the sense, and I subscribe to the newspaper, but I don't watch the local news. But I don't get a sense that the media in Lexington covers transit unless something's gone wrong.
Something an issue, yes.
Well, unless you pay for it. But maybe social media is how you reach people.
It's certainly a way. Yeah.
And, just do little human interest stories from both the employees and the riders on how important Lextran is to them. The one thing that concerns me about going to the public is, oh gosh, they're gonna ask for more money.
Sure.
That'll be the first thing that would pop into a lot of people's heads, I'm sure. And just so everybody at the table knows, there's one person here that's always been kind of against trying to raise more money.
Thank you, Steve.
And if there's a way to eliminate
Do you think the
Fair.
public here understands how transit is financed?
No.
Because in so many cities, people say, I don't understand why it has to be subsidized at all. Don't people pay to get on the bus, and doesn't that pay the cost of the service?
Yeah, I would say that's probably the perception of people that don't ride the bus, is that that's, maybe even people that ride the bus.
I think that's the perception of any public service that has a fee. Like, why do the pools have to be subsidized? Why do the golf have to be subsidized? It's a conversation we're constantly having with the public, because they don't understand how public services work. So I don't know that you're ever gonna win that battle, that it's all subsidized.
When you said people have to go hand in hand to government every year to ask for money, it's like, how do you have any consistency in
That's the
service
majority
at
of transit
all?
systems.
That's-
The
yeah,
majority of
that's-
transit systems, you go to your member cities, you know, if you have multiple jurisdictions, you're going every year and trying to get general fund contributions. And typically you get some stability over the years, right? You can anticipate 3% increases each year, but
Yeah.
that's how most managers have to live. It's tough.
You know, we're fortunate in some of the things that have happened here recently.
You're in much better financial shape. This would be a difficult conversation in a lot of transit agencies that would say, we can't maintain what we've got.
Well, it would
Much
have
less-
been,
But I mean-
right before COVID, it would have been that.
That, okay. Okay. And a couple of you have mentioned paratransit, which is a different service operated by a different operator, but,
But that's part of our perception problem.
Is the paratransit doesn't function well. And so I
Yeah,
think the
so
whole
public
system doesn't
transit
function
doesn't function well. I think it's a fourth of our budget, Nikki, paratransit. And so,
And it's our responsibility.
yeah,
Because we hired a
Oh, yeah.
company that does it.
And it's only
Yeah.
gonna grow as
Our name's on the vehicles too, right?
Yep.
So the public doesn't know necessarily.
Yeah.
Our ATP dev's name's on there too, but they don't know what that is. We've done such a great job with our logo, everybody knows what Lextran is.
And I mean, I wonder, this may be even larger than a broad strategic plan, but is there a need for us to consider our strategic options for paratransit and how we operate, how that system, and that's where I'm maybe less salient on what the federal requirements are for how paratransit functions. Are there ways for us to make the system more efficient within the bounds of those federal requirements so that it doesn't, eat up 50% of our budget 5 years from now?
Some of those requirements are pretty tough to get around. Your requirement of the windows, and you can't deny trips, that's the big one. So you cannot say no.
deny.
Yeah, that is.
I guess,
That's the toughest one.
but on-demand point-to-point is a federal requirement.
Yes.
Okay.
One lever you can pull is making sure that, and I'm sorry, I haven't asked this question before, is the eligibility determinations. Who's on the system. I mean, there are very strict requirements on who gets to use it and who doesn't, and I didn't mean to talk to Fred about
We
that
just
process.
redid that contract
Yeah.
earlier last year, I guess it's 24, yeah.
who does the eligibility? Some third party?
Biokinetics is the name of the firm.
Good.
We transitioned from ADA rod.
Okay.
And they strictly follow ADA. Do y'all do conditional eligibility?
We do in-person assessments. So
Okay, yeah, so you're there. I mean,
That
that's,
was one of the things that we took on.
yeah, that's above what most are able to do. As far as strictly limiting the eligibility, who gets on the system.
There isn't much you can do to make ADA paratransit more efficient. You can make it more compliant, but efficient, the one thing you can do, does RATP Dev do, they have got a software system that optimizes the
Yes.
trips?
Not very well, as far as I can
Not
tell.
very well, possibly, but yes.
Well, that's what's paid off in a lot of places that we're able to automate the dispatching in a way that optimized the putting together trips. There's too often you dispatch one vehicle to pick up one person, and then they go pick up another one. And there's a way to develop a tour that tries to make the most efficient use of
As we transition from vans to the cutaways, that's gonna add a little bit of extra capacity, so you can put more people on the buses. You're getting a little bit of efficiency there. It's not gonna drive the cost down enough to, make a huge difference, but it's something. And that is part of the plan that we're looking at, is fleet from now on to be cutaways rather than vans.
Aren't they at around 2 passengers now? Isn't that what we had learned yesterday?
For cutaways, they're 2 wheelchair.
No, just the RATP devs efficiency. Aren't they around 2 passengers an hour?
I don't think that's quite that high.
Or not?
that.
That's typically
Two
that's
is-
typically what you can
Two is about
accomplish.
okay.
That's about what you can expect.
Yeah.
We fall just short of that.
Really.
But I think to your point, we're not gonna make it more efficient. We're gonna get it more effective, and we're gonna hit our, but it's always gonna be a fourth, and I think it just, we had a very unique situation for a very long time that it was efficient, and it's probably always gonna be a fourth of our budget, if not a third of our budget, a half of our budget, if our revenue stays at the pace it's growing. And so at some point, whether it's 5 years or 10 years, we've got to either cut services or increase revenue, which is why I'm trying to focus more on what's our financing options.
Yeah, because even if we increase ridership, it's the problem of a public agency, is our costs go up. Because our fare box recovery is so low. And I do think that that's an important piece of our public perception, is that we are affordable.
How do other transit agencies comply with the rule that you can't say no?
They have to.
Well,
they
and
have to
I'll
plan.
make an assumption that in other agencies, they probably have similar demand times that we do.
They hopefully they have enough consistent demand that they are able to provide staff and vehicles so that they can meet all the trips. The theory behind this is saying, if you're a person with a disability and you're unable to use a regular fixed route bus, but if you could use it, then they would always pick you up. You're never going to be waiting at a bus stop and have the fixed route bus pull up and say, I'm sorry, we're not taking you today. So therefore, if every disabled person who uses fixed route is accommodated, you have to do the same thing for people who are ADA dependent.
No, I'm not saying that shouldn't be the law. At first, I thought it's crazy, but then everybody would say, well, we don't have enough buses, so they wouldn't have the fleets that they needed. If you didn't have that rule, you would just use that as an excuse. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I mean, if you know, what time is it, 6 in the morning?
That's the initial dialysis trips, yes.
Yeah, you're gonna have X, and that's the only time you would need a driver to work would be to do one trip, for an example. I'm just wondering how other people.
Is
manage
every
that.
paratransit trip door to door, or do they go to the transit center and transfer like everybody
Door to
else?
I mean, in my experience, you have to make sure capacity mirrors demand, right?
Yeah.
You staff up and supply the level of service that's required by the demand, and you don't want to say limit demand, but you manage demand through fares, making sure you're double the base fixed route fare, which that's one not issue, but you have very low fares, right? So there's not a lot of barriers to demand, right? Just because your fare's so low, and you can only charge double the base fixed route fare. So there's not a lot of room there. You're going to have a lot of discretionary trips, maybe where other communities wouldn't. Yeah, you've got to match. You just match it. And I haven't looked at this analysis. One thing I'll take a look at is relative to overall budget. What is paratransit for other? I can't necessarily look at similar agencies. I'll just quickly I can look at other clients that I serve and kind of see where they're at.
That'd be interesting to see it.
My guess is you're probably in line. just because your fixed route is so robust.
And we'd go above and beyond the ADA as well. We're not just the premium, or we have the premium service outside of the
Mhm.
boundary. We're countywide on paratransit.
Mhm.
Not a lot of other places are like that.
Yeah, at that, so, well, there you go, that's another issue that you guys are gonna have, is that you've got a bigger umbrella than everybody else. I mean, most folks, are limiting their paratransit service to the 3/4 of a mile, to just what's required by ADA, and you're going above and beyond that, so your percentage could end up being higher, but I think it's, my gut tells me you're kind of in line with everybody else, yeah.
Fred, what went wrong with Red Cross? Because for years they did a good job. And, I mean, did they just take their eye off it, or was there something else that caused the problem? I mean, did our
Like why their
demand-
on-time performance dipped, because they
Yeah.
weren't hitting their goals.
It didn't dip, it dropped.
It dropped. And COVID, I think, would have been part of that story. Because when COVID initially happened and we had the shutdown, we pulled them into shadow service. So we would have the paratransit buses follow the fixed route buses to help manage our fixed route demand. Because we really couldn't do paratransit, if I remember correctly, with the distance requirements.
Yeah.
I don't know after they came out of that, if we ever hit those metrics again. I don't remember clearly.
I don't think we did, but, and I'm wondering too, if there was something that triggered more demand at different times than had happened before that.
I would have to look into that one. I don't know if anything functionally about the system or the demand on the system changed before and after COVID that would have caused that on-time performance to change so rapidly. That I'm not sure.
I just think, and I might be wrong about this, I think our healthcare industry is oversized for the balance of the rest of the city. And so it just keeps getting more and more, and then people are getting older and older, it's just gonna be like that.
Much of our tour this morning was, hey, this is this hospital, and this is this hospital, and here's all these clinics, and here's.
Here's a brand-new hospital in the middle of nowhere.
That's for Eastern Kentucky.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a worthwhile thing to understand about our growth patterns and why you see so much retail, is that we are the retail center for everywhere
Yeah. Oh,
2 hours east of us.
I get it, yeah.
And 2 hours south of us. But yeah, we don't have the growth in housing and the growth in retail aren't in parallel.
Yeah.
So I think we've got 24 minutes. I've got daycare pickup, so just trying to be efficient. I think we have some consistent or alignment that we want to limit the scope of like reviewing documents, that we will combine
Mhm.
all of those. I think for economic trends, we say like look to the growth study that the city just did. You know, maybe if there's a few other things that you want to add, but there's a couple of really good studies that have just happened. The board will update the SWOT analysis and put that in the SOW. And then the main goal of this SOW, or this, is the vision, the levels of change, the financing models. And I think we still need alignment on what level of public engagement we want. But I think we have alignment on the other things.
I agree with that.
That's why you're here. We have a professional consultant.
Because I heard both. I heard, you know, we want lots of public engagement, and then I heard like, well, let's just not confuse the public and come with a couple options. But then I also heard we need buy-in on whose plan is this, because I do think we have a lot of public support, for better or for worse, around public transit. There's a big appetite. I don't know if they understand the cost, but for public transit, by both elected leaders right now, by the general public, by lots of very prominent stakeholders. If you got them involved, would that be helpful?
Well, I think maybe segmenting the populations, right? Because you just mentioned stakeholder engagement. To me, I guess that's where I go first. I mean, when you're developing the vision, stakeholder engagement, I would think would be critical, right? I mean, you want the city involved, you want major employers, so, you know, the healthcare network, power brokers within the community, to, be in the know as you go through the process. Going straight to the public, that's different, right? I mean, that's staff setting up tables at the transit center.
Yeah.
Maybe when you've got, like you said, something to show them on the front end, we're at some point in the process. I mean, it looks a little bit different, I guess, than stakeholder engagement, or a lot different.
You're right.
I think our public thinks that, and I think they're right, that they are stakeholders because they are funding the system.
Mm-hmm.
So,
We can use their elected representatives to represent their thoughts.
I mean, I think there's some value to that in the sense of going to a council member is a good way to understand how the people in their part of town feel about
Yeah.
the system and feel about transit in general and what they want. And
They can
then
do
I
some
think there's an
engagement.
opportunity, if you need to drill down in particular areas, we can do that. But I agree, I don't think I don't know that the plan will be made appreciably better by broad, general public
Yeah.
input.
No, you had-
Because
you had some
everybody
good
thinks,
points there.
everybody wants it to be better, of course, like, what else are they gonna say?
So we do want kind of the stakeholder engagement power broker to kind of buy into whose plan is this? But do you do the levels of change first and then go to the stakeholders and say, we've got option A, B, and C. It's gonna be funded A, B, and C.
Can you reach out to the stakeholders more than once?
Yeah, I mean, well, it depends, that's
I-
how much they're gonna charge us for it, but.
Well, no, but they don't have to talk to everybody every possible stakeholder to say, help, come up with your vision. But if you can come to consensus on what are sort of the four major things that you want, that are built into your vision, understanding that for each one, there may be levels of investment. That's when you maybe go back and say, if you had these three levels of investment, how comfortable would you be if we went after number one? And how preferable would number three be? I've seen it done that way, and there is some. The problem is that when you go back, don't be surprised that the stakeholders will choose the cheapest alternative. They'll say, well, if this will make things better at the lowest cost, why wouldn't we want to do that, as opposed to things that make incrementally better at a much higher cost. That's the risk.
Where are we on the microtransit study?
They're looking at peer cities right now to come up with what might work best for us. Following that, we're going to be taking that around to some major stakeholders and getting feedback on how we feel. And cost is going to be a component of that too.
But you're going back to the same stakeholders, or you're going back to similar stakeholders for paratransit, and
Yes.
so that has to be coordinated. Well, do you want to take the first pen at what you heard from us, which I think is like, we need the stakeholder engagement? I think you go with like, there's option A, B, and C, it costs A, B, and C, like what, when you're doing the stakeholder engagement, there's the dollar voting exercise. There's lots of exercises to force people to think in terms of cost and not just wish list. So you can do it without setting high expectations. And then I want this to mostly focus, unfortunately, I just don't think we have a lot of levers to finance it, other than putting a tax referendum on the ballot. Like, just in Kentucky, we don't, and the federal funds are no longer there. So.
Yeah, short of something innovative that someone hasn't told us about yet, you're absolutely right.
Right, just, we don't have many options legally.
Could rob a bank. Oh, that would be an illegal option.
Just by Kentucky statute that we as a board can't do, or as a organization. Okay, so you're gonna take the first pen of what we heard
Yes.
today?
Yes.
We have alignment. Anything else you want to, that we need to finish?
The only thing that I'd say is that when it comes to, when we're talking about option A, B, and C, I think there's gonna be option A, B, and C across a spectrum of potential parts of the vision, I guess. You know, if there's, let's just use frequency as an example, like that's a vertical. And option A, B, and C is we want to increase or decrease our headways from 35 minutes to 20 minutes, or 15, or 7. And, you know, we can do that across certain lines, all lines, what have you, and those will come with certain costs. And there's going to be other parts of the vision, whether it's around employer retention, whether it's around coverage, that will also have these sort of good, better, best options. And I think that the struggle that we'll have is which of those are we going to prioritize? Because they'll all come with sort of different financial implications. Because everybody's ideal, I think, is frequent coverage with a lot of frequent service with great coverage.
Right.
But I know from having looked at other agencies that even the biggest cities don't get to have it both ways.
But then, you know, you run into the late night trips. There is a gap that we have with employers for the third shift. That's something that, you know, we might need to discuss at some point, and put the dollar attached to the cost to that, because we can't forget, in any service expansion that we do, where we expand our span of service, paratransit also comes with an additional cost. So it's complicated, and
That's right.
And that's one of the conversations that I think we'll have to have early on is are we interested in continuing to offer broad service to people who need it the most, or are we chasing choice riders?
who are we serving? Who are we trying to serve?
But just one comment, because before we close, this has been a very impressive process, and I've enjoyed being involved a lot. And when they said one of the strengths of the board of Lextran 5 years ago was an engaged board, you are as good as any engagement I've
We
seen.
have our tenured member.
I
every
was
year.
gonna say, I was the only one that was on the board then. We've made great.
Well, you've
improvements.
managed to retain whatever it was you were doing well 5 years ago.
No, we've made some great upgrades, and
That's
these
good.
two folks are a big part of it.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Can we talk timeline? Because
Yes.
I think we were trying to get this out in September, and it's January.
So what we'll need to do is, once we have determined the scope, it would come before the board as a task order.
Okay?
Well, the scope will go, you know, we did the two firms, so they'll both have a chance to look at that, give us our proposals back. We'll pick one, bring it before the board as a task order, and be ready to launch. I should be able to get this done a week or so. I should be able to have something out to you all to review. From there, we can, you know, take that feedback, make our edits, and continue to move forward. So I think this committee, what would you think? We should get this committee back together again.
We need to make edits on the SOW.
And do we want this committee to come back together before we take it to the full board, or would it be okay to just go ahead and do what we need to do over email and then bring everything back to the full board? Would that be okay?
I think so.
And then maybe what we do is, once we get this off the ground a little bit, our consultant will give us a, you know, list of milestones or a schedule, and we can decide when this committee needs to reconvene based on that information.
Yeah. I think you could put that in the SOW, is to outline milestones and a stakeholder engagement schedule.
And do we expect that whichever on-call group we get to manage this is going to then have a subcontractor who is better versed in transit? Because, like, I love Kersey & Kersey, they're great, but they're an architecture firm.
If
Okay.
Kersey & Kersey is the chosen firm, then Nelson Nygaard would be the one
Okay.
to take on the bulk of the work, yes.
Is that their subcontractor?
Yes.
Is
And
there, this is maybe too weedy, but would it be more cost efficient for us to just hire Nelson Nygaard directly?
Well,
Garrison Gersi's gonna mark up whatever they,
that we've already have their cost proposals and hourly rates, and we've gone through the negotiations of that. So that's how, if we went to Kersey and Kersey, or if we went to Nelson Nygaard, we'd have to redo the procurement process. Yeah. We have to go back all
right,
the
yeah,
way.
you would, Mhm. Which would take more time.
They'll probably save you 15%.
Yeah. We're not that greedy, probably less.
Mm.
Okay.
Okay, but so we agreed, we're just gonna do it over email. We're gonna get this back to the board on our February meeting?
If we, yeah, it's very possible that we can get this to the board at our
Okay.
February meeting.
I think that should be our goal. Yep.
Just because I think we were trying to get this in last fiscal year, because so I just feel like we're 6 months behind. I would like to,
Yeah, we first started trying to schedule this in February of last year.
yeah. So I'd like to just now this move fast, that we have as soon as getting the board together, it was scheduling and timing. And then what's the time we're gonna ask our consultant to get this done?
We'll put that in scope, and that's going to depend on how that engagement piece turns out, because that's really where the time sink is going to be,
Right.
taking that outreach piece. But part of what we will ask back from them as we work through the scope is, what do you think your timeline is going to be, on their side?
Yeah, well, I know, like, timeline drives price too, so if we want to get it done in 3 months or 9 months, 9 months is going to be more expensive than 3 months, so that's if we want to outline timeline, maybe you take a first guess at that, and then we can decide over email.
Can do.
These are all the questions I like to answer when I respond to RFPs, so,
Yeah.
all right,
All right. Good, everybody? Thanks very much.
thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it. Are you adjourned?
We are adjourned.